My hands smell like copper, and I can't wash it off. I've been sitting in my truck on the shoulder of US 93 for 2 hours with the engine off, and the inspection sheet folded into a square small enough to fit in my palm. The ultrasound photo is clipped to the visor above me, and I keep looking at it because I don't know where else to put my eyes. The paper in my hand is a federal inspection rotation for next Tuesday. My name is on it. So is a man who retired 3 years ago. I need to explain that. I need to explain all of it, because if something happens to me between now and Tuesday, my wife is going to open a survivor's benefits packet, and the Bureau is going to hand her a folded flag and a story about a workplace accident, and none of it will be true. What is true is on this piece of paper, and on the pressure gauge at the end of the east branch of Gallery 4, and on the inside of a door that isn't drawn on any blueprint that has ever existed. My name is Dax Renner. I'm 39 years old. I'm a structural inspection engineer for the Bureau of Reclamation, and I have worked 11 years underneath a dam that most Americans have driven across on their way to a weekend they'll forget by Monday. I'm telling this into a phone recorder because I don't trust email, and I don't trust the office server, and I don't trust Ellis, who has been my supervisor for 6 of those 11 years. And who I now understand has been training me the way a man trains a dog to sit at a specific spot on a specific mat. Let me back up. I grew up in Kingman, Arizona, an hour and change from the dam. My father worked concrete on the Glen Canyon spillway repairs in the early 80s, and he never really came home from that job in the way that matters. He came back to the house, but he left something down in the tunnels, and every man in our family understood that, without ever saying it out loud. I took the Bureau job because I wanted to touch the same cold walls he touched. That's the honest reason. Anyone who tells you they took a federal engineering job for the pension is lying about at least half of it. My wife Marla is 7 months pregnant. It's a boy. We haven't picked a name yet, which she thinks is because I'm indecisive, and which is actually because I keep opening the baby name website and closing it again because I can't decide whether I want my son to have a name that's already been on a Bureau rotation sheet somewhere. You'll understand what I mean in a minute. The dam has galleries. That's the technical term. When you drive across the top, what you see is the crest and the intake towers and the visitor center and the tourists posing next to the bronze plaques. What you don't see is that the interior of the concrete is riddled with inspection corridors, narrow, cold, humming with the low-frequency thrum of the turbines 200 feet below. There are 5 main galleries stacked vertically, connected by service elevators and stair shafts. Gallery 1 is near the crest, Gallery 5 is near the foundation, and the numbers don't mean much except to us. Gallery 4 is the one that matters. Gallery 4 is technically a drainage gallery. It collects seepage water, the small amount of Colorado River water that finds its way through the concrete over decades and has to be relieved, measured, and pumped back out. It's one of the oldest active galleries and the one with the most instrumentation, pressure gauges, thermocouples, flow meters. Everything gets logged twice a shift, by hand on paper, and then transcribed into the SCADA system upstairs. Belt and suspenders. That's the Bureau way. My first day on the Gallery 4 rotation, 6 years ago, Ellis walked me down the length of it. Ellis is 61 now, was 55 then, and he walks the way a man walks who has done the same walk 5,000 times. He pointed out the low-pressure zones, the pump stations, the emergency phones, and at the far end, past the last pump station, he pointed out what he called the East Branch. Unused, he said. Cathodic protection stub from the 70s. Nothing to inspect back there, but the gauge on the manifold at the junction P-14. You still log it, twice a shift. It's always going to read close to 0, and that's fine. That's what you want. If it ever reads negative, you call me before you call anyone else. Anyone. I asked him what negative would mean. He said, "It'll never read negative, just call me." I logged P-14 twice a shift for 6 years, and it read 0.0 every single time, Until last month. Last month it read negative -0.3 inches of water column, and I stood there for a full minute with my pen over the logbook, because a sealed drainage manifold cannot read negative. Water doesn't pull, water pushes. A negative reading in a sealed line means something on the other side is drawing air, and there is not supposed to be another side. I did not call Ellis first. That's the mistake I'm going to spend the rest of this recording explaining. The elevator to Gallery 4 takes 90 seconds, and it is the only 90 seconds of my workday when my phone has no signal, no clock, and no way to tell my wife I'm still alive. The car is a service model from the mid-90s, painted the same beige as every federal interior in the western United States, and it descends through the body of the dam at a speed slow enough that you can feel the pressure change in your ears. Twice on the way down. Once when you pass the penstock line, and again just before the doors open on the corridor. The corridor smells like a penny left in rainwater. That's the honest description. Copper and mineral, and the faint chalky note of concrete that has been wet and dry and wet again for 90 years. The lights are fluorescent, mounted in wire cages every 20 feet, and about a third of them are the wrong color temperature because maintenance replaces bulbs one at a time as they fail, and the newer bulbs are cooler than the older ones. So the corridor alternates warm and cold as you walk, warm and cold, like walking through a series of small weather systems. My boots on the concrete make a specific sound down there, not an echo exactly. More like the sound gets swallowed and then handed back to you a half-second late. I asked an acoustics guy about it once at a bureau training in Denver, and he said it was normal for a long, unlined corridor with high humidity and a lot of embedded metal. He also said, "You spend a lot of time down there?" And when I said yes, he changed the subject. I mention that now because I didn't think anything of it then. The morning I got the negative reading, I was on second shift. 1,400 hours. I remember the time because I'd just eaten a gas station breakfast burrito in the break room, and I was going to log P14 first because it was the farthest gauge from the elevator, and I like to knock it out and then work my way back. That was my routine. Ellis had taught me that routine. I walked the length of Gallery 4, 580 feet. I passed the 3 pump stations, the 4 temperature sensors, the seepage collection weirs. Everything reading normal. Everything wet in the way it's supposed to be wet. The east branch is at the very end. It splits off the main corridor at a 45-degree angle and runs maybe 60 feet before terminating at the manifold. The branch is narrower than the main gallery. You can touch both walls if you spread your arms, and the ceiling is lower. I've always disliked the last 20 feet of it, but I've never had a good reason. P-14 is mounted at chest height on a stainless steel plate bolted to the manifold. Analog dial, glass face, the needle painted white against a black background. The scale runs from -5 to +15 inches of water column with 0 centered. The needle was at -0.3. I stared at it. I took off my glove and tapped the glass, the way you tap any gauge that gives you a reading you don't like, because sometimes the needle sticks. It didn't move. I tapped it harder. Still didn't move. I took a photograph of it with my phone. No signal down there, but the camera still works, and then I stood back and looked at the manifold itself. The manifold is a length of 6-inch Schedule 80 steel pipe running horizontally along the wall, capped at both ends, with the gauge on top and a small drain valve on the bottom. There's nothing behind it. The manifold sits 18 inches out from the concrete wall of the branch, and the wall behind it is solid. 90-year-old concrete, poured in place, no seams, no penetrations. Except there was a door. I want to be careful about how I say this, because I've thought about it a lot in the weeks since. And I want to describe what I actually saw, not what I understand now. Behind the manifold, offset maybe 4 feet to the right, there was a steel door set flush into the concrete, painted the same color as the wall, which is a specific bureau shade of gray-green that they've been using on interior structures since roughly 1962. The door was rectangular, about 6.5 feet tall, 3 feet wide, with a single handle at waist height, no visible hinges, no serial plate, no drawing reference stenciled next to it. I had walked past that door 4 times a week for 6 years, and I had never seen it before. That's not right. Let me correct that. I had walked past that door 4 times a week for 6 years, and I had never registered it before. There's a difference, and the difference matters, because when I stood there in the corridor with the negative reading behind me and the door in front of me, I understood immediately that I had been walking past it the whole time. My eyes had been going over it, and my brain had been filing it under nothing, like a fire extinguisher, like a wall. I didn't touch it, not that first day. I logged the P14 reading as 0.0, which is a federal crime I will now have to answer for eventually. And I walked back to the elevator, and I rode the 90 seconds up to the surface, and I sat in my truck in the employee lot for 40 minutes before I could make my hands stop shaking enough to drive home. Marla asked me how work was. I told her fine. I want to explain what a Bureau blueprint archive looks like, because it matters for what happened next, and because most people picture a room full of rolled paper and a librarian with reading glasses, and that's not what it is anymore. The main archive is in the Denver Federal Center, but the Boulder City Field Office keeps a working set of every drawing that pertains to our dam. 2 rooms in the basement of the administration building. The first room has the flat file's long, shallow drawers, 4 feet by 6 feet, holding the original Mylar sheets. The second room has the digital terminals, where you can pull any drawing that has been scanned since roughly 1998, which is most of them, but not all. I went down there on a Saturday. Saturdays at the field office are dead. There's a security officer at the front desk who nods at your badge without looking at the name, and the HVAC runs at a reduced setting so the whole building has a slight coolness to it and a slight dryness to it, and your footsteps on the linoleum sound louder than they should. I told the officer I was catching up on records reconciliation. He said good luck. He was watching a college football game on a phone propped against a stapler. I badged into the archive and I closed the door behind me. The first thing I pulled was the as-built drawing package for Gallery 4. As-builts are the drawings that get updated after construction is complete to reflect what actually got built rather than what was originally designed. They're the most accurate representation of the physical structure. Every gallery has a set. Every set is indexed by drawing number, revision number, and issue date. Gallery 4's as-built package is drawing series G4-A through G4-M, 13 sheets. I laid them out on the light table one at a time, and I traced the east branch with my finger, working from the junction at the main corridor down to the terminal manifold at the end. There was no door on any of the drawings. I want to be precise here, because I'm an engineer and precision is what I have. The east branch is drawn on sheets. G4-F and G4-G. Both sheets show the branch as a straight, unlined concrete corridor with a manifold at the terminus. Both sheets show the wall opposite the manifold as unbroken. Both sheets are stamped and signed by the original design engineer, whose name I recognized because it's on half the drawings in the archive. Both sheets have been through 6 revisions. None of the revisions added a door. I pulled the mechanical drawings next. M series for anything involving piping, valves, or mechanical equipment. If the door led to a chamber that contained a pump, a valve, a filter, an anode, anything at all, it would show up in the M series. Nothing. I pulled the electrical drawings. E series. If the chamber had a light in it, a receptacle, a conduit run, a grounding lug, it would show up. I know because I have specified those exact items on other galleries myself. Nothing. I pulled the structural drawings, S series. If the concrete pour had ever included a formed opening in that wall, the reinforcing steel around that opening would be detailed on an S sheet. Rebar doesn't lie. You can't hide a rebar detail because the shop that bent the steel would have a bar list, and the bar list gets referenced back to the S sheet. Nothing. I sat down on the archive floor with my back against the flat files, and I put my hands over my face and I tried to think about what I was looking at. There is a door in the east branch of Gallery 4. It is a real, physical painted steel door, roughly 6.5 feet tall, and I have touched the wall next to it, and the wall is real concrete. That door leads to something. Concrete does not form itself around a door frame by accident. Someone poured a form around that frame in the 1930s, or someone cut that opening later. And either way, there should be a drawing. There is no drawing. I got up, and I went to the digital terminal, and I did a full text search of the drawing database for the words East Branch, cathodic, anode chamber, and every synonym I could think of. I got the same 13 sheets I'd already pulled. I searched by drawing number ranges. Nothing missing from the sequence. Then I searched for the phrase Ellis had used on my first day. Cathodic protection stub. I got one hit. It was a 1978 drawing labeled G4-X-1, revision 0, no revisions after. The title block said, Cathodic Protection Anode Chamber, East Branch as-built. It was signed by an engineer whose name I did not recognize, and stamped by a bureau supervisor, whose name I also did not recognize. The drawing showed a small rectangular chamber behind the wall, roughly 8 feet by 10 feet, containing 4 sacrificial magnesium anodes on threaded rods, wired through a junction box back to a monitoring panel that was supposedly located in the main gallery. There is no monitoring panel in the main gallery. I would have logged it for 6 years. I printed the drawing. Then I sat there and I looked at it for a long time. The paper was the wrong weight. Bureau archive prints from that era are on a specific bond, 20 pound, with a watermark you can see when you hold it up. This sheet was 24 pound, no watermark, and the toner on it was slightly too glossy, the kind of gloss you get from a laser printer, not the offset process the Bureau used through the 80s. The drawing was fake. Somebody had planted an answer in the archive, and they had planted it exactly where a curious inspector would look for one. I drove home from the archive that Saturday, and I sat in the driveway for a while before I went inside. Marla was at her sister's in Henderson. The house was empty. I could see through the front window that we'd left the kitchen light on. And I remember thinking about the electricity bill, which is a thing you think about when your brain is trying very hard not to think about something else. I went inside, and I ate a sandwich standing at the counter, and I told myself the drawing was probably legitimate and I was probably just wrong about the paperweight. That happens. Bureau archives get consolidated, a drawing gets damaged, someone reprints it on newer stock, files it back under the original number. It's not standard practice, but it's not unheard of either. That was the story I told myself Saturday night. Sunday morning, I drove back to the field office. Same security officer, different football game, same nod. I went to the archive and I pulled a different set of records, not drawings this time, but the maintenance logs. The Bureau keeps everything. That's the one thing I want anyone listening to understand, because it's the thing that turned out to be the crack in the whole system. Every anode ever installed on the entire dam has a service record. Every replacement has a work order. Every work order has a signature, a date, a materials receipt, and a photograph as of about 1997. Cathodic protection anodes have a service life. Magnesium anodes in the environment described by that planted drawing would last, on the outside, 20 years. Aggressive service, maybe 15. That means since 1978, the anodes in that chamber would have had to be replaced somewhere between 2 and 4 times. I pulled the cathodic protection maintenance file for Gallery 4. It's a fat manila folder, 3 inches thick, cross-indexed with the SCADA maintenance database. I went through every page. There is no record of any anode ever being installed, inspected, or replaced in the East Branch of Gallery 4. Ever. Not in 1978. Not in 1993. Not in 2008. Not last year. The other galleries have full service histories. Gallery 2 has anodes replaced on a rolling schedule since the mid-80s. Work orders signed, receipts stapled, photographs paper-clipped. Gallery 4's other anode locations near the main corridor pump stations have the same, robust, boring, well-documented. The East Branch has nothing, which meant one of two things. Either the anode chamber on that planted drawing had been quietly forgotten by the Bureau for 47 years, while the anodes inside it corroded to nothing, and the cathodic protection failed catastrophically, in which case the steel reinforcement in the surrounding concrete should be visibly rusting, and the concrete should be spalling. And it is not. Or there are no anodes in that chamber. There never were. The drawing was placed there for exactly the reason I found it, on exactly the timeline someone predicted I would find it, and the paperweight was a mistake made by whoever printed it in a hurry. I sat with that for a while. I want to describe what my body was doing, because I've thought about this part a lot. My hands were cold. Not shaking, just cold, in a room that was maybe 72 degrees. My mouth had gone dry enough that I had to work up saliva to swallow, and I had this feeling behind my sternum, a full feeling, like I'd eaten something that was still sitting there. I've had that feeling exactly twice before in my life. Once, when my father died. Once when Marla told me she was pregnant. It's the feeling of information you cannot unknow. I put the anode file back in the drawer. I locked the archive. I badged out. I told the security officer to have a good one. He said, "You too." I drove home the long way, up past the marina and along the lake road, because I wanted to see the dam from the outside for a while. It was late afternoon, and the light was that specific desert gold that only exists for about 45 minutes in the fall. The dam was doing what it always does, sitting there, holding back a river, humming inaudibly at a frequency that only registers when you're standing on it. Tourists were taking photographs from the observation deck. A tour bus was unloading at the visitor center. None of them knew about the door. I want to be clear that I did not, at this point, know what was behind the door. I still don't, entirely. What I knew, sitting in my truck on the lake road that Sunday evening, was that someone had gone to the trouble of falsifying a federal engineering drawing and planting it in an archive in a specific location, so that when a curious inspector went looking for an explanation, he would find one. And that meant someone had anticipated the inspector, which meant someone had anticipated me, which meant this had happened before. I got home before Marla did. I opened the fridge and I stood there looking at the leftovers she'd wrapped in foil, and I understood in a very quiet way that I was on a schedule I hadn't agreed to. When Marla came in, she put her bag down on the counter and she said, "You look tired." I said the archive was tedious, reconciliation stuff. She said, "You've been going in on weekends a lot." I said, "I know. I said I'd stop soon. I meant it when I said it. That's the thing I want on record. I meant it. I didn't stop. Monday I went to work like normal, because that is what a man does when he is trying to convince himself that Saturday and Sunday did not happen. I badged in at 06:30, drank the burnt coffee in the break room, and had a normal conversation with Ellis about the Broncos, who he cares about and I do not. He asked how Marla was doing. I said good, tired, third trimester. He said his wife had been the same way with their second. He said the trick was to just be present and shut up. I laughed. He laughed. That was a real moment between two men who like each other, and I want to note that, because everything that came after has to be understood against the fact that I still liked Ellis Vane on that Monday morning. I logged Gallery 4 at 0800. P-14 read 0.0. That's not a typo. The needle was back at 0. I stood in the East Branch with the manifold in front of me and the door behind me and to the right, and the gauge was resting flat on the 0 mark like nothing had ever happened. I tapped it. It didn't move. I photographed it. I logged it accurately this time, 0.0. Then I went back to the elevator, and I rode up to the surface and I did the rest of my shift. That night I opened my laptop at the kitchen table after Marla had gone to bed, and I pulled up every P14 reading I had ever logged. 6 years of readings, twice a shift, roughly 4,200 data points. I dumped them into a spreadsheet and I plotted them. For the first 5 years and 11 months, every reading is 0.0, a flat line, boring, nothing to see. Then last month, the negative -0.3 reading I mistakenly logged as 0, then corrected in my personal records. Then 0.0 again this morning. 2 data points. That's not a pattern, I know that. I've been through enough bureau training on statistical analysis to know that 2 points can't tell you anything. But I have a habit, call it a defect of trusting my hands before I trust my numbers. And my hands, when they were on that gauge Monday morning, told me the reading had been negative more than once. The needle had a certain amount of play in it. When a gauge has been sitting on 0 for 6 years, the needle does not have play. It has resistance. The pivot stiffens. This one moved too easily under my finger. So I did something I probably shouldn't have. I pulled the archive SCADA data for P-14, going back to the sensor's installation date in 1994. SCADA logs everything every 15 minutes, indefinitely. I had to go through 3 different subfolders and 1 legacy database to get it all, but I got it. 31 years of automated readings. I plotted them. There is a cycle in the data. It is invisible if you are looking at any 1 month or any 1 year. But if you plot the entire 31-year record and you smooth it with a rolling average, there is a periodic dip in the reading. Not to negative 0.3, smaller than that. Something like negative 0.02, which is below the resolution of the analog gauge, which is why nobody standing in the corridor would ever see it. The dip repeats every 28 days. I sat with that for a long time. 28 days is not a hydrological cycle. Water in a concrete structure doesn't care about the lunar month. The Colorado River doesn't operate on a 28-day rhythm. The reservoir level fluctuates seasonally, on a scale of months, not weeks. Payroll is 28 days. The Bureau runs on a 4-week pay period. Time cards auto-submit at 1,400 hours on the last Friday of each period. I checked the timestamps on the dips. Every single dip in 31 years of data occurs on a Friday, at 1,400 hours, give or take 15 minutes, which is the SCADA sampling resolution. I closed the laptop, and I went and stood in the kitchen, and I put both my hands flat on the counter, and I made myself breathe in a count of 4. Hold for 4, out for 4. It's a thing Marla taught me from her prenatal yoga. It works better than you'd think. The water pressure in a sealed manifold under Hoover Dam was dropping every 28 days at the exact minute the entire Bureau of Reclamation submitted its time cards. Water doesn't know when payday is, but P-14 did. I went to bed at some point that night. I don't remember lying down. I remember Marla was asleep on her left side with the pregnancy pillow between her knees. And I remember standing in the bedroom doorway looking at her for a long time before I got in. I remember thinking about the baby name website. I remember thinking about my father and the way he used to sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee at 3 in the morning when he couldn't sleep, and how I hadn't understood at 9 years old that he wasn't drinking the coffee, he was just holding it. I understood it now. The next morning at 0800 I went down to Gallery 4. And I logged P14, and it read 0.0, and I walked to the door, and I put my hand on the handle for the first time. I want to describe the handle carefully because the details of it are the whole point. It was a standard industrial lever handle, cast aluminum, painted the same gray-green as the door and the wall. The paint on the handle was worn down in a specific pattern. The top of the lever was bare metal where a palm would rest, and the underside was still painted where fingers would curl but not press hard. The bare metal was polished, not just worn. Polished the way a handrail gets polished by decades of the same motion. But it was the grease that stopped me. There's a lubricant the Bureau uses on gallery equipment, a lithium-based grease with a specific pale amber color. It gets applied to hinges, latches, valve stems, anything that moves. It also gets on your gloves when you handle those things, and then it gets transferred to whatever else you touch. Over years, you can look at a piece of equipment and read its service history by where the grease has migrated and where it hasn't. The grease on the handle of that door had migrated into a shape, right hand, palm on top of the lever, thumb curled to the near side, 4 fingers curled to the far side. The grease was heavier at the base of the thumb and lighter at the fingertips, which is how a right hand grips a lever when it pushes down and turns clockwise. The shape had been reinforced so many times that it was crisp. You could see individual finger positions. I lifted my own right hand, and I hovered it over the handle without touching, and my hand fit inside the grease pattern exactly. It fit any right hand of roughly my size. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't specifically my handprint. It was the print of every right-handed man of average build who had ever put his hand on that lever. And their prints had all landed in the same place because the human hand is not that variable and the handle was not that big. I still pulled my hand back. I stood there in the East Branch, in the alternating warm and cold light from the fluorescent tubes, with the hum of the turbines coming up through the soles of my boots, and I thought about who else had stood in that exact position. Corbin Ash, my predecessor. Ellis had introduced me to Corbin on my first day, briefly, in the break room. Corbin was maybe 55 then, quiet, wore reading glasses on a lanyard around his neck. He shook my hand and he said, "You'll do fine down there, just log what Ellis tells you to log." He said it with a smile that I read at the time, as friendly, and now, remembering it, I would describe differently. I would describe it as apologetic. Oh, Corbin took early retirement about 8 months into my training. I remember Ellis telling me over coffee. I remember Ellis being quiet in a way that wasn't like him. And I remember asking if Corbin was okay, and Ellis saying, "He's where he needs to be." That's a phrase you use for a man in a facility, or for a man who has died. I understood it at the time as the first, and I filed it away, and I didn't think about it again for 6 years. Before Corbin, according to the personnel records I would eventually pull, the Gallery 4 rotation had been walked by a man named Halloran, who retired in 2003. Before Halloran, a man named Jessup, who retired in 1989. Before Jessup, a man named Reyes, who retired in 1975. I could keep going back. I did keep going back. The rotation for Gallery 4 East Branch went back to 1938, when the dam was 2 years old, and every single inspector on that rotation had been a right-handed man between 5'9" and 6'1", weighing between 170 and 190, according to the Bureau's medical clearance records that go into the personnel file. I am 5'11". I weigh 180. I am right-handed. I took my hand away from the door and I stepped back, and I looked at the door as a whole thing for the first time. It was a door that had been opened on a schedule for 87 years by men who resembled each other physically closely enough that they were probably interchangeable to whatever was on the other side. The maintenance grease pattern was the fingerprint of a job, not a man. Any of us could have made it. All of us had. I did not open the door. I want to be clear about that, for the record. I stood there for what my watch later told me was 11 minutes, and I did not turn the handle. What I did instead was I took photographs. I photographed the handle from 4 angles. I photographed the door frame, the paint, the concrete around it, the manifold, the gauge. I photographed the way the fluorescent light fell across the surface. My hands were steady when I took the pictures, which surprised me. My hands were cold and steady. Then I walked back down the East Branch to the main corridor, and I finished my rounds, and I rode the elevator up, and I clocked out at 15:30, and I went home. That night I sat at the kitchen table, and I looked at the photographs on my phone, and I noticed something I hadn't noticed in person. There was a small brass plate at the bottom of the door frame, set flush with the concrete, about the size of a business card. In person, in the fluorescent light, it had been invisible against the paint. In the photograph, with the flash, it caught the light. It had a number stamped into it, 4 digits. The number was my employee ID. I have to explain about employee IDs because if you don't work for the federal government, the significance is going to slide right past you. A Bureau employee ID is a 6-digit number in most cases now, but during a specific window in the 90s and early 2000s, they used a 4-digit system for field office personnel. Mine is 4 digits because I inherited it from a legacy roster when I transferred in from a smaller office in Page. The digits are not sequential with hire date. They are assigned from a pool. When someone retires or leaves, their number goes back into the pool and can be reassigned. That is standard practice, and it is not, by itself, sinister. My 4 digits are 7419. I zoomed in on the photograph on my phone at the kitchen table Tuesday night, and I held the screen close to my face, and I looked at the plate on the door frame, and the digits stamped into the brass were 7419. I set the phone down. I got up. I walked to the sink. I filled a glass with water, and I drank it, and I filled it again, and I drank that too. I could hear Marla in the bedroom, on the phone with her mother, laughing at something. She has a specific laugh she uses only with her mother, softer than her normal one. I stood at the sink and I listened to it for probably a minute. Then I sat back down and I opened the photograph again to make sure I hadn't hallucinated it. 7419, stamped into brass, set flush into concrete, in a doorframe that appeared on no drawing in any archive. I want to be careful about the timeline here because the next part matters. That brass plate had to have been installed when the doorframe was installed. You cannot set a plate flush into 90-year-old concrete without cutting into it. And there was no cut. The concrete around the plate was original, unbroken, the aggregate matching the surrounding wall exactly. The plate had been placed in the wet concrete when the wall was poured, which was in 1934 or 1935, which was 60-plus years before the 4-digit employee ID system existed, which was 80-plus years before I received my number. I sat with that for a while. There are a few possible explanations. I want to list them because I did list them at the kitchen table that night on a legal pad. Engineers make lists when they're scared. 1. Coincidence. The digit 7419 could mean something else. A drawing number, a valve tag, a manufacturer's serial, in which case the fact that they match my employee ID is a statistical accident. I calculated the odds later. 1 in 10,000, not impossible. 2. The plate was installed later. The concrete around it was patched so skillfully that I couldn't see the seam under fluorescent light in a photograph. Someone with access to the gallery, at some point in the last few decades, cut a hole and placed a plate and matched the concrete. Possible. Difficult, but possible. 3. The number on the plate is not fixed. It reads differently to different people, which is a category of explanation I do not accept, because I am an engineer, and brass does not rearrange itself. And I need to say that out loud, even if I no longer entirely believe it. 4. The employee ID system was not random. The pool of 4-digit numbers was not assigned from a hat. Someone, somewhere in the Bureau's personnel infrastructure, had been assigning specific numbers to specific people for specific purposes since before those numbers existed as employee IDs. The number had been on the plate first. It had been waiting. I circled option 4. I want to explain what circling option 4 did to me physically. My jaw locked up. That's the honest description. The muscles at the hinge of my jaw, on both sides, went rigid, and I couldn't unclench them for probably 30 seconds. I've had that happen once before. In my 20s, at a dentist. It's a specific fear response. Your body decides it's not going to open its mouth for anything. When my jaw released, I picked up the phone, and I almost called Ellis. I got as far as pulling up his contact. I looked at his name on the screen. Ellis Vane. I thought about the way he'd said anyone on my first day, when he told me to call him before I called anyone else, if P-14 ever read negative. I locked the phone, and I put it face down on the table. Then I did the thing that, in hindsight, was the beginning of the end. I logged into my work laptop through the VPN, and I opened the personnel database. I have limited access. I can see my own file and the files of anyone I supervise, which is nobody, so effectively just my own. But there is a public directory that lists all current Bureau employees at the Boulder City office, with their employee IDs for inter-office mail purposes. I searched for 7419 in the directory. It returned 2 results. Me, Dax Renner, GS11, structural inspection, and a second entry. No name, just the ID and a job classification. Subgallery rotation, GS-09, Boulder City Field Office. I had never heard of that job classification. In 11 years, I had never heard the phrase subgallery spoken out loud by anyone. There is no subgallery on any drawing. There is no subgallery in any training material. There is no subgallery in any of the Bureau's public organizational charts. But there was a job for it, and apparently, according to the directory, I held it. I did not sleep Tuesday night. I want to say that plainly because everything I did over the next 3 days was done by a man who had not slept, and I want that on the record in case any of my decisions look worse than they were. Wednesday morning I called out sick. First time in 6 years. I told Ellis I had a stomach thing. He said, "Take care of yourself, drink fluids, don't come back until you're clear." He said it warmly. He asked if Marla was okay. I said she was fine. Then I drove to the field office anyway, and I parked in the visitor lot instead of the employee lot, which is a distinction that matters because the visitor lot doesn't require a badge to enter, and there's no camera on it. I walked in through the public entrance for the interpretive center, which shares a lobby with the administration building, and I badged in through a side door that I knew from experience the security officer never watched on Wednesday mornings, because Wednesday morning is when the interpretive center runs its senior tour, and the lobby is full of retirees asking about turbine capacity. I went to the second floor. Human Resources. There's a woman there named Priya Solan who has been the Bureau HR specialist for our office for 12 years and who owes me a favor from 3 years ago when I helped her husband, who is not a Bureau employee, get a stuck bolt off a boat trailer at the marina. It was a small favor at the time. I called it in that Wednesday. I told her I had a payroll question. I told her the system was showing me on a rotation I didn't recognize, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to affect my overtime accrual. That's the exact framing I used, because it's a mundane complaint that HR gets constantly, and it wouldn't raise anything. She said, "Sure, pull up a chair, let me look." She logged into the personnel management system on her computer, and she typed my ID, and she said, "Huh." I asked her what. She said, "You've got 2 job codes. That's not usually hold on. That's not right. Let me refresh." She refreshed. 2 job codes. She said, "Okay, so one of these is your regular GS11. The other one is a GS09 assignment called subgallery rotation. It's flagged as concurrent, which means you're paid for both, but the GS09 pay is being deposited into a separate account. Do you have a secondary direct deposit set up?" I said I did not. She said, "Well, somebody set one up for you. It's routing to a Bureau internal account. That's not something I've seen before, actually. Let me pull the history on this." She clicked, she scrolled, her face changed. She said, "Dax, this account has been active on your record since your hire date. 11 years. I said that wasn't possible. I said I would have noticed the deposits. She said, "You wouldn't. The GS09 pay isn't showing up on your pay stubs. It's a shadow line item. It's hold on, I've never seen this before, but it looks like the pay is being generated and deposited, but the amount is being suppressed on the stub because the whole line is flagged as classified compensation, which is a category we use for people who work at Los Alamos or on weapons programs, which you don't." I said, "No, I don't." She said, "There's a supervisor on the assignment. It's routing all approvals to a single sign-off." I asked whose. She said the name Ellis Vane, and then she said it a second time, and then she looked up at me over her glasses and she said, "Dax, what did you get into?" I told her I didn't know yet. I told her I would appreciate it if she didn't mention any of this to anyone until I figured it out. She said she wasn't supposed to do that. I said I understood. She looked at me for a long moment and then she said, "How's Marla?" I said, "Good. Third trimester." She said, "Give me an hour. Come back at 11. I want to check something." I went to the cafeteria and I bought a coffee I did not drink. I sat at a table by the window and I looked out at the reservoir. There were paddleboarders out on the lake, in wetsuits, moving in a slow line along the shore. I watched them for a while. I did not think about anything specific. My mind had that pale, hollowed-out feeling you get when it has taken in more than it can process, and it is idling. At 11, I went back up. Priya had 2 printouts on her desk. She turned them so I could read them. The first was a list of every employee at the Boulder City office who had ever held the sub-gallery rotation classification. It went back to 1938, 41 names. Every one of them a man. Every one of them tagged with the same brass plate number as their primary employee, ID. Corbin Ash was on the list, with a date range ending in 2022. Halloran was on it. Jessup, Reyes. My name was on it, with a start date of 11 years ago and no end date. The second printout was a payroll routing report. It showed the classified compensation account for the sub-gallery rotation position. The account balance for all 41 inspectors, combined over 87 years, was $0. The money had been generated and it had been deposited and it had been withdrawn, all of it. Every pay period, 28 days. Withdrawn to another bureau internal account with a routing code Priya didn't recognize and couldn't trace through her system. She said, "I have to report this." I said, "Give me until Friday." She said, "Why Friday?" I said, "Because Friday is payday." Wednesday afternoon, I drove out to the lake, and I sat on a picnic bench in a day-use area, and I called Ellis Vane on his personal cell. I want to describe the setting because it matters. The day-use area is at the end of a spur road about 6 miles east of the dam, on the Arizona side. There's a small cove there with a boat launch that nobody uses in the middle of the week, in the off-season. There were 2 ravens on the picnic table next to mine, and a plastic grocery bag caught in a creosote bush, and the sound of the water was that particular hollow lapping sound you get in a reservoir with no wave action. I picked that spot because there is no cell tower coverage from the office there, and because I wanted to see Ellis's face when he answered, even though it was a phone call, and I wasn't going to. He picked up on the second ring. He said, "You okay?" I said, "I need to ask you something." He said, "Ask." I said, "What is P-14? He was quiet for a count of maybe 8 seconds. I counted them. Then he said, "You logged something." I said, "Yes." He said, "When?" I said, "Last month." He said, "Dax." And then he stopped. Then he said, "Where are you right now?" I told him. He said, "Stay there. I'll come to you." I said, "No. Talk to me on the phone." He was quiet again. When he spoke again, his voice was different, not scared, tired, like a man who had been carrying a heavy thing for a long time and had just been told he could put it down, but wasn't sure he believed it. He said, "How much have you figured out?" I said, "I know about the door. I know about the plate. I know about the pay period, and I know about the classification. I know that 41 men have done this before me, and I know that Corbin Ash is on next Tuesday's rotation, and I know that he retired 3 years ago. I don't know what's behind the door. I don't know what the money buys. I don't know what happens on Friday at 1400 hours. Tell me." He said, "I don't know what's behind the door either." I said I didn't believe him. He said, "I've never opened it, Dax. In 34 years, I have never once opened it. That's the whole job. That's the entire content of the job. You don't open it. You log P-14 twice a shift, and if it ever reads negative, you call me and I tell you to log it as 0. And every 28 days at 1400 hours on a Friday, the pressure inside dips a little, and something takes what it takes, and it goes back to 0. That's it. That's what the sub-gallery rotation is. It's a shift you work by not doing anything. I said, that's not an answer. He said, it's the only answer I have. I was trained the way you were trained. Halloran walked me down there on my first day, and he told me the same thing. I told you, log P-14, don't open the door. If it reads negative, call. He didn't know what was behind it either. He said Jessup didn't know. He said Jessup said Reyes didn't know. It goes back. I said, the money. He said, the money isn't for us. The GS09 is a rider on the classification. It's how the system pays whatever is on the other side. The withdrawals go somewhere I don't have access to. I've tried. I have a folder at home with everything I've tried. I said, why me? He said, you match the profile. Right-handed, right build. Legacy ID from a consolidated office. Family connection to Bureau concrete work. Your father, Glen Canyon, that was a factor. I didn't pick you, Dax. HR generated you. The system generated you. My job was to walk you down there on your first day and point at the manifold and tell you what to log. I said, you knew what you were doing to me. He said, I knew what I was continuing. I told myself it was maintenance. I told myself I didn't understand it well enough to disrupt it. I told myself the men before me had done it, and the dam was still standing, and the lake was still full, and my kids had gone to college on the GS-09 differential I was actually receiving, which is not the same account as yours, Dax, and I want you to know that. My money went to my family. Yours goes somewhere else. I said, where? He said, I don't know, but I know that on the day Corbin retired, his account started routing to a new destination, and I know that on the day you were hired, your account started routing to the same place, and I know that when I checked last year, the destination account balance was still 0. Whatever it is, it takes it as fast as it comes in. It has been hungry since before the dam was built. I said, the dam is holding it. He said, the dam is feeding it. There's a difference. He said one more thing before I hung up. He said, Dax, listen to me. Do not open the door. Do not stop logging. Do not go in on a Friday afternoon. Corbin opened it. That's why he's on Tuesday's rotation. He didn't retire. Then he said, I'm sorry. I'm actually sorry. I know that doesn't help. I hung up. I sat on the picnic bench for another hour before I could stand up. I want to talk about my first day now, because it changed shape after the phone call with Ellis, and the new shape is the whole story. When you start on the Gallery 4 rotation, there is a walkthrough. It's a bureau standard. Any new inspector on any gallery gets one, and it's essentially the outgoing or supervising inspector taking you down the length of the corridor, pointing at every piece of equipment you're expected to monitor, telling you what a normal reading looks like and what an abnormal reading looks like and what to do if you see one. It takes about 2 hours. There's a form you sign at the end. Ellis countersigns it, copies go to HR and to the field office safety officer. It's routine. My walkthrough with Ellis was 6 years ago on a Tuesday morning in October. He had a thermos of coffee, and I had a bureau clipboard, and I remember I was wearing new boots that were still stiff at the ankle, and I remember the fluorescence in the corridor doing the warm, cold thing, and I remember Ellis being funny. He was funny that day. He told me a story about a raccoon that had gotten into the Gallery 2 elevator in 1998 and had to be extracted by 2 men with a fishnet. He told me about the time a senator had tried to walk the galleries in a suit and had to be turned back at the second landing because his dress shoes couldn't handle the wet floor. He was warm, and he was skilled, and he was teaching me a job. At the end of the walkthrough, at the far end of the East Branch, at the manifold, he had said, "This is P-14, unused branch, cathodic protection stub. Log it twice a shift. It'll always read 0. If it ever reads negative, you call me. Anyone." I had looked at the manifold. I had looked at the gauge. I had, and this is the part I remember most clearly now, glanced past the manifold at the wall behind it, and my eyes had gone over the door, and I had not seen the door, but Ellis's eyes had. I remember this now. I did not remember it before Wednesday afternoon. It came back to me on the drive from the picnic bench, in the way memory sometimes gives you a thing you'd filed under nothing. Ellis had looked at the door. He had looked at the door for maybe a full second, longer than he'd looked at anything else in the corridor, and then he had looked at me, and then he had looked back at the door, and then he had said, "That's everything for the branch. Let's head back." He had been checking whether I could see it. The walkthrough was not an orientation. It was a compatibility test. He was standing there with a new inspector at the end of the East Branch, watching to see whether my eyes would land on the door or slide off it, because the men who could see the door on the first day were not the right men, and the men whose eyes slid off it were. Mine had slid off. I had passed. I want to sit with what that means for a minute because it took me a long time to sit with it. There is a filter somewhere in the process that placed me at Gallery 4. It selects for men whose visual attention can be redirected, whose peripheral processing will accept a large painted steel door as part of a wall, who will, when guided, log a negative pressure reading as 0 and not think about it again. It's a psychological profile, and it is administered through a physical space, and the men who pass the profile are given a job classification that pays them a shadow salary they do not receive and cannot detect. Ellis had passed the same test 34 years earlier, walked down by Halloran. Halloran had passed it before that, walked down by Jessup. All the way back to 1938, when the first inspector on the rotation was walked down by whoever had walked down before him, which was presumably one of the original construction supervisors, which means the test was being administered before the concrete was fully cured, which means the door was designed into the dam, which means someone poured a form around a door frame in 1934 or 1935 and set a brass plate flush into the wet concrete with a number that would not exist as a human identifier for another 60 years. And they did it deliberately. And they knew what they were doing, and they knew who would eventually stand in front of it. I want to describe what my body did when I understood that. I was driving. I was on the highway coming back from the lake. I pulled onto the shoulder because my vision had narrowed. That's the honest description. The edges of my visual field had gone gray, and I could only see the center of the road, a small circle maybe 20 degrees wide, and I knew that if I kept driving, I was going to hit something. I pulled onto the shoulder, and I put the truck in park, and I put my hands on the steering wheel, and I made myself look at the ultrasound photograph clipped to the visor above me. The baby was there, small profile, curled hand. I looked at the curled hand for a long time. Then my vision came back, and I drove home, and I told Marla I loved her when I walked in the door, and she looked at me strangely because I do not usually say it like that, and she said, "I love you too. Are you okay?" I said, "I need to tell you something on Friday. Just wait until Friday." She said, "Okay. That's my wife. That's who she is." She said, "Okay. Thursday I went to work. I know how that sounds. I want to explain it. I went to work because I needed to be inside the building for what I was planning to do, and because a man who calls out sick 2 days in a row when his supervisor knows he's uncovered something is a man who has flagged himself for attention. I went in at 06:30. I drank the burnt coffee. I did not run into Ellis in the break room, which was unusual. I did my morning rounds. I logged P-14 at 0800, and it read 0.0. I did not go near the door. At 1000, I told the shift lead I was going up to admin to sort out a payroll question with HR. He waved me through without looking up from his crossword. I walked to admin, but I did not go to HR. I went to the archive. I want to explain what I did in the archive because it is the part that will probably get me prosecuted if any of this becomes federal record, and I want the reason to be understood. I made copies. I made copies of the falsified 1978 drawing G4-X-1. I made copies of the anode maintenance file showing 47 years of no service. I made copies of the P-14 SCADA data with the 28-day cycle annotated in red pencil. I made copies of the personnel roster Priya had printed for me, with the 41 names. I made a copy of my own personnel file, which I am legally entitled to. I made a copy of the payroll routing report showing the shadow account. I put all of it in a manila envelope. I did not mail it. I did not upload it. I walked out of the building with the envelope inside my bureau-issued laptop bag, and I drove to a small storage facility off Boulder Highway where I had rented a climate-controlled unit 2 days earlier under Marla's maiden name and paid for a year in cash. I put the envelope in a fireproof box in the unit. I locked the unit. I drove back to the office. I want the record to show I did this before I did anything else. If nothing else survives, that envelope does. Marla knows where the key is now. She didn't know Thursday. She knows now. At 13:30, I clocked out early. I told the shift lead the payroll thing was going to take another appointment. He waved me through again. I drove home. Marla was at a prenatal appointment with her sister driving her. The house was empty. I sat at the kitchen table and I opened my work laptop, which I am not supposed to bring home, and I logged into the bureau scheduling system through the VPN. I pulled up next Tuesday's rotation. There were 6 inspectors listed for Gallery 4. 5 of them were current employees I recognized. The 6th was Corbin Ash, employee ID beginning with a legacy prefix, assigned to Gallery 4 East Branch. Shift start 0600. Shift end 1400. Supervising Ellis Fain. I stared at his name for a while. Then I did something I hadn't done yet, which was I looked at the rotation for the Friday. I was worried about tomorrow at 1400 hours. I don't know why I hadn't looked yet. Some part of me had been avoiding it. The Friday 1400 slot for Gallery 4 East Branch had one name on it, Dax Renner. Employee ID 7419, classification, sub-gallery rotation GS09. The assignment had been added to my schedule 3 years ago. On the exact day, I would later verify that Corbin Ash had opened the door and stopped being on the rotation in the way the other men had been on it. My name had been placed in the slot in advance. It had been waiting for me for 3 years, on a system I checked every Monday morning, and I had never seen it because it was flagged under the classified compensation category, which suppressed its display on my primary schedule view. I logged out. I closed the laptop. I sat at the kitchen table. I thought about Corbin Ash. I thought about what on Tuesday's rotation meant if he had retired in 2022. I thought about the words Ellis had used. He didn't retire. And I thought about the account balance, which had been 0 for 87 years, and about what a zero balance looks like when the withdrawals are made in things that are not money. I thought about my father. I thought about the way he used to hold the coffee cup without drinking it. I thought about how, when I was 12, he had taken me down to see the Glen Canyon Dam on a family trip, and he had stood at the observation deck for a long time without saying anything, and my mother had asked him what he was looking at, and he had said, "I'm just checking." I did not understand then. I understand now. He had been on a rotation too. A different dam, a different door, but the same job. The men in my family had been feeding something for a long time, and I had inherited the shift the way you inherit a house or a bad back, and the Bureau had generated me from a personnel algorithm that had been waiting for a right-handed man with the right build and the right family history to age into a legacy, DD. Marla came home at 1500. I made her dinner. I did not tell her yet. I had one more thing I wanted to see before Friday. I wanted to see what P-14 read on a Thursday night at midnight. I want to explain how I got into the dam at midnight without being on shift, because it matters that the system let me. Bureau badge access is tiered. Regular inspectors like me have gallery access during posted shift hours only. Outside those hours, the badge reader at the elevator will beep red and log a denied entry. And if you try more than twice, the security office gets a notification. I had never tried to badge in after hours in 11 years. I had no reason to. Thursday night at 11:45, I drove to the dam. I parked in the employee lot. I walked to the power plant entrance on the Nevada side. I badged in. The reader beeped green. I walked to the service elevator. I badged in. The reader beeped green. I want to say that again. My badge, which was configured for daytime access only, opened both doors after hours. Somewhere in the security database, my access level had been quietly upgraded. It had not been upgraded through any process I had requested or been notified of. It had been upgraded because the system knew where I was scheduled to be tomorrow at 1400 hours, and it had adjusted my permissions to allow the schedule to happen. The elevator descended. 90 seconds. Ears popped twice. Door opened on gallery 4. The corridor at midnight is different from the corridor during shift. The fluorescents are on a night setting, which cuts about half of them, and the ones that remain are spaced far enough apart that there are stretches of near darkness between them. The turbines still hum. Water still moves through the penstock lines a few galleries above, but the corridor itself has the quality of a room in a house at 3 in the morning, familiar and wrong at the same time. I walked to the East Branch. I did not run. I want that on record. I walked at my normal pace, boots on concrete, the same swallowed and returned sound, and I passed the pump stations and the seepage weirs and the temperature sensors, and I reached the manifold at the end, and I looked at P-14. The needle was at -0.1. Not -0.3 yet, -0.1. The cycle was building toward Friday afternoon. The pressure was dropping slowly, over hours, in a curve that would reach its minimum at 1400 tomorrow, at the exact minute the entire Bureau of Reclamation submitted its time cards. I looked at the door. The grease on the handle looked slightly fresher than it had on Tuesday. Not fresher as in newly applied. Fresher as in, this is going to sound strange, and I don't have better language for it, as in oriented toward being used. The pattern had brightened somehow, the way a path in a lawn brightens when someone is about to walk it. I want to be careful about that description, because I know how it sounds. I'm just telling you what my eyes reported. I did not touch the handle. I took out my phone and I photographed everything again. Gauge, door, plate, handle, corridor, full documentation. I photographed the reading and I photographed the time on my watch. And I photographed the wall where the anodes should have been, but weren't. Then I did the one thing I had come down there to do. I sat down on the concrete floor with my back against the wall opposite the door, and I waited. I don't know what I was waiting for. I want to be honest about that. Some part of me thought that if I sat there long enough at midnight on a Thursday, the door would do something, or something would come out of it, or something would speak, and I would know. I sat there for 1 hour and 23 minutes. I know because I photographed my watch every 15 minutes. Nothing happened. The gauge did not move. The door did not move. The turbines hummed. The fluorescents did their warm, cold cycle. My phone had no signal, no clock, other than the camera timestamp, no connection to anything above the concrete. I was alone in a corridor that was not empty, and I could not prove it. At 1:08 in the morning, I stood up. My knees had gone weak, not from fear this time, just from sitting on cold concrete. I walked back down the branch to the main corridor. I walked to the elevator. I badged out. Green. I rode up. I badged out at the power plant door. Green. I sat in my truck in the employee lot for a while. I thought about Corbin Ash. I thought about what it meant that his name was on Tuesday's rotation 3 years after he had opened the door. It meant that whatever the door did to a man did not remove him from the system. It moved him into a different part of it. The rotation was not a shift the way I understood shifts. It was a shift the way an assembly line has stations. Some men worked the log and do not open station. Some men, the ones who opened the door, worked a different station on the other side of it. All of them were still Bureau employees. All of them still had employee IDs. All of them were still on the schedule. Corbin was going to be on Gallery 4 East Branch on Tuesday at 0600. He was going to walk down there from wherever he had been for the last 3 years. He was going to walk somebody through. I drove home. Marla was asleep. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. and I watched her breathe for a long time. Then I got up, and I went to the kitchen, and I started writing down everything I have just told you. I told Marla on Friday morning. I did it at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I did not drink, and the manila envelope from the storage unit sitting between us. I told her the short version. I told her about the door, and the plate, and the payroll, and Ellis, and my father. I told her about Corbin. I told her that at 1400 hours I was scheduled for a shift I had not agreed to work, in a location I had not agreed to enter, and that the system had already upgraded my badge to let me do it. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I was done, she said, "Show me the envelope." I opened it. I spread the copies out on the table. She read them the way she reads anything important, slowly, in order, one page at a time, with one hand resting on her belly. She did not cry. She did not ask if I was sure. She said, "Okay, we're leaving." I said, "Where?" She said, "My cousin in Cedar City, today, right now, pack a bag." I said, "I can't just..." She said, "Yes, you can. You called out sick Wednesday. You can call out sick today. You are calling out sick today. Get in the truck." That's what we did. I called the shift lead at 09:30, and I told him I still wasn't right. He said, "Take the weekend." I said I would. I told Priya Salon in a text message that I was going to be unreachable until Monday, and that if anyone from the office contacted her about me, she should refer them to the field office director and not to Ellis Vane. She wrote back one word. Okay. We packed one bag each. We took the ultrasound photo off the visor and put it in the glove box. We drove. We got as far as the shoulder of US 93 outside Boulder City before I had to pull over, because I was shaking too hard to hold the wheel steady, and because I needed to sit for a minute with what I had just done, which was walk off a shift. That is where I have been for the last 2 hours, and that is where I am recording this. The engine is off. The ultrasound is clipped back to the visor. Marla is sitting in the passenger seat with her hand on my forearm, not saying anything, letting me do this. It is 13:42. In 18 minutes, if I understand what I have learned this week, the pressure in P14 will dip to its minimum, and something on the other side of that door will take what it is scheduled to take, and my name is in the slot. I do not know what happens when the slot is empty. I do not know whether the system reschedules. I do not know whether Ellis walks down there himself. I do not know whether the shortage propagates up through the concrete somehow, whether the dam feels it, whether the lake behind it feels it. I do not know whether a man in Cedar City with a pregnant wife and a manila envelope in a storage unit is going to be allowed to remain a man in Cedar City with a pregnant wife. I checked my badge access from the truck 2 minutes ago through the Bureau app on my phone. Still green. Still upgraded. I checked Tuesday's rotation. Corbin is still on it. My name is still on it too, for next Friday at 1400, and the Friday after that, and the Friday after that. The schedule extends into the fall of next year. My son will be 4 months old by then. I want to end this with the thing I have understood in the last hour, because I think it is the thing that matters. The door has been open the entire time. Not open the way a door is open when you turn the handle. Open the way a mouth is open. It has been open since 1935. Men in my profile have been standing in front of it, twice a shift, 5 days a week, for 90 years, and each of us has been feeding it the small thing it takes on payday, which is not money, which is something else, which is the reason my father held his coffee at 3 in the morning and did not drink it, and which is the reason the account balance has been 0 since before the war. We are not the keepers. We are the mechanism. The door does not need to be opened because we are the door, and the plate with my ID on it was set into the concrete in 1935 because the concrete knew what my name would be. Corbin opened it. That is a different thing. Corbin walked through, and now Corbin walks down the corridor on Tuesday mornings at 0600 to walk a new man through the compatibility test, and the new man's eyes will slide past the door, and the new man will pass, and it will keep going. I don't know if driving to Cedar City is enough. I don't know if driving anywhere is enough. I am going to try. If you are hearing this and you work for the Bureau of Reclamation and you have a 4-digit legacy employee ID and you have been assigned to Gallery 4 East Branch and you have been told that P-14 will always read 0, and if it ever reads negative, you should call your supervisor before you call anyone else. Do not call your supervisor. Log the reading you actually see. Go home to your family. The needle in P-14 just dipped. I can feel it. I don't know how, but I can. My hands are cold and my mouth is dry and the ultrasound is above the dashboard and Marla's hand is on my arm and it is 13:59 and 1 second and 2 and 3 and my badge just beeped. From inside my pocket, a single green tone. Somewhere under 200 feet of concrete, a door I have never touched has just registered me as present. Marla asks me what the sound was. I tell her it was nothing. We are driving. The badge beeps again.